The message came through at 6:42 on a Friday evening, and it was not the words that broke something in me. It was the little smiling emoji at the end. I was standing in the garage of our house outside Nashville, Tennessee, holding a half-finished birdhouse I had been building for the backyard, the smell of sawdust hanging in the warm air, when my phone lit up on the workbench. Megan's name appeared first. Then the sentence, "Going on a solo trip with my first love, do not be jealous." For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen while the ceiling fan clicked above me like an old clock counting down. My name is Logan Brooks, 42 years old, project manager for a commercial construction firm, the kind of man who checks tire pressure before road trips, keeps extra batteries in the kitchen drawer, and still believes promises should weigh more than moods. Megan and I had been married 11 years. Not perfect years, but real ones. A mortgage, 2 dogs, Sunday coffee, arguments about paint colors, medical bills, birthdays, quiet apologies, and all the ordinary glue that makes a life feel permanent. I read the message again, slower this time, hoping maybe the meaning would change if I gave it enough patience. It did not. First love. Solo trip. Do not be jealous. The words sat there bright and casual, like she had told me she was stopping at the grocery store for milk. I wiped my thumb across the dusty edge of the phone and felt something inside me go still. Not angry, not loud. Still, there is a kind of silence men learn when disappointment has nowhere safe to land. I had heard the name before, of course. Brandon Vale, high school sweetheart, former football star. The man Megan's college friends still mentioned with that soft, nostalgic tone people use when they want the past to sound harmless. For years, I had smiled through it. I told myself everyone had a history. I told myself marriage meant trusting the present more than fearing the past. But lately, Brandon had stopped being history. He had become a notification that made Megan turn her phone face down. A laugh from the other room that ended when I walked in. A name hidden inside stories that were suddenly missing details. I looked toward the driveway through the open garage door. Her white SUV was gone, and the evening sun was sliding low over the maple trees, painting the street gold like nothing terrible could happen under that kind of light. I could have called her. I could have demanded answers. I could have sent a paragraph full of hurt and given her the satisfaction of knowing exactly where to press. Instead, I set the phone down beside the birdhouse, picked up the small brass hinge I had been trying to attach, and finished tightening the screw. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Maybe because part of me had been waiting for this. Maybe because the last 6 months had already taught me what her message only confirmed. Megan thought my calm meant I had no options. She thought being loved by a patient man meant there would never be consequences. She was wrong. I looked at her text one last time, saved a screenshot, and placed the phone screen down on the workbench. Then I walked into the house, past the framed wedding photo in the hallway, past the kitchen table set for 2, and into my office, where a blue folder had been waiting in the bottom drawer since February. The blue folder was not thick, but it felt heavy in my hand because every page inside it had been earned by a silence I never wanted to need. I carried it to my desk, turned on the small brass lamp, and sat down while the house settled around me. The air conditioner clicked on. One of the dogs shifted in the hallway. Somewhere outside, a lawn mower faded into the distance. Normal sounds moving through an abnormal evening. I opened the folder slowly. Bank statements. Hotel confirmations. A printed email from a travel rewards account Megan forgot was still linked to our shared address. A receipt from a boutique resort outside Asheville, North Carolina, reserved for 2 adults, 3 nights, king room, mountain view. Not a cabin for quiet reflection. Not a solo reset. 2 adults. I stared at those words until they stopped hurting and started explaining. The first receipt had shown up in February, hidden beneath a subject line about loyalty points. Back then, I told myself there could be a reason. Maybe a friend. Maybe a work retreat. Maybe I was seeing shadows because the house had felt colder lately. That is what patient men do. We give doubt a place to sit at the table. Then doubt starts eating everything. By March, Megan was guarding her phone like it held state secrets. By April, she had joined a fitness studio 30 minutes away from home, even though there were 3 closer ones. By May, she was taking long walks after dinner and coming back with that distant, polished calm people wear when they have already decided the truth is optional. I did not follow her. I did not break into anything. I did not play detective in some ugly way that would leave me ashamed of myself. I simply noticed what was placed in front of me. Marriage teaches you rhythms. You learn the sound of your spouse being tired, the difference between a real smile and a social one, the tiny pause before a lie gets dressed up as privacy. I had learned Megan's rhythms over 11 years, and lately every rhythm was off. I pulled out the last page in the folder, a copy of the lease agreement for our house, the retirement account summaries, and the ownership documents for the small rental duplex I had bought before we married. I had not gathered them to punish her. I had gathered them because a man who senses a storm checks the roof before the rain comes through. At 7:16, my phone buzzed again. A photo this time. Megan at the airport, sunglasses on her head, rolling suitcase beside her, smile bright enough to sell a lie. Heading out. Please do not make this weird. I looked at the photo for a long moment, then at the framed picture on my desk from our 10th anniversary dinner, her hand over mine, both of us smiling in candlelight. The two images did not feel like the same woman. Maybe they were not. Maybe the woman in the frame had been real once, and the woman at the airport was just what remained after attention became more important than loyalty. I typed 3 words, then deleted them. Typed a sentence, deleted that too. Finally, I sent the only response that did not give away the ground beneath her feet. Have a safe trip. Then I called my attorney, Caleb Mercer, whose business card had been tucked behind the folder since the first day I admitted to myself that hope was not a plan. I spent the next hour going through the folder again, page by page, tracing every reservation, every receipt, and every note Megan had left unguarded, mapping the rhythm of her choices. It was not about anger. It was about clarity. I pulled the curtains aside, letting the last of the afternoon sun fall across the desk, the light catching on the edge of a document that showed the pattern I had been suspecting for weeks. Each entry told a story if you knew how to read it, and I had learned over a dozen years of marriage to read between the lines. Megan thought the trip would be private, that her past would remain a soft memory, and that I would never notice the details tucked into her plans. She had underestimated the power of observation and preparation. I remembered the nights sitting on the back porch, sketching out work schedules and household plans, learning patience the hard way, understanding that some lessons arrive in silence, not shouting. I set the folder down, took a slow breath, and imagined the airport terminal where she would be boarding soon, her rolling suitcase beside her, sunglasses perched on her head. I visualized her laughter, the casual glances, the sense of freedom she would feel, believing she was untouchable. Then I pictured myself, calm, composed, ready, understanding that the only movement needed was mine to make the ground shift beneath assumptions she had built over months. I reached for the blue folder, the collection of agreements, trust documents, and separate property papers that had been quietly prepared, stored, and untouched until this moment. I did not need to make a scene. I did not need confrontation. Every number, every clause, every carefully filed document would speak for itself. This was the invisible foundation I had been reinforcing since February, the groundwork of patience, calculation, and foresight. I leaned back, letting the sun warm my hands as I opened the next page, the one that outlined schedules, account transfers, and carefully timed notifications, and realized how much power could be held without ever raising a voice. For years, I had believed in doing the right thing quietly, trusting that honesty and preparation could outlast impulsive actions. Now the proof of that belief was arranged neatly in front of me. Outside, the evening air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint hum of a neighbor's lawnmower, normal life unfolding unaware of the tension building inside my home office. I picked up a pen and made a note of the time Megan's flight would depart, the time the resort confirmed her arrival, and the sequence of her planned activities over the next few days. Each detail was a brushstroke on a larger canvas, a careful pattern that would soon illustrate the difference between perception and reality. I placed the pen down, closed the folder with deliberate care, and for a long moment, just listened to the quiet of the house, the rhythm of my own breathing, and the steady knowledge that patience, observation, and preparation were quietly aligning for the moment that would not require theatrics, only timing. By 8 o'clock that night, the house had gone quiet enough for every old memory to start making noise. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of ice water untouched beside me, looking at the empty chair across from mine and remembering how easily Megan used to fill a room. In the first years, She was warmth in motion. She danced barefoot while making pancakes, left handwritten notes on the bathroom mirror, and called me from parking lots just to tell me the sky looked beautiful. That was the woman I married. Or at least, that was the woman I believed I married. Somewhere along the way, the warmth became performance. Her smile stayed bright in public, but at home it arrived late and left early. She laughed harder at other people's jokes than she did at mine. She dressed carefully for errands that should have taken 20 minutes and came back 2 hours later with vague explanations and no receipt. When I asked simple questions, she called them pressure. When I noticed distance, she called it insecurity. That is how a man can be trained to doubt his own eyes. Not all at once. Slowly, politely, with enough soft words to make concern feel like a character flaw. I thought about Brandon Vale, the name that had floated through our marriage like a song nobody admitted was still playing. He was not some stranger from a dating app or a random face from a business trip. He was the past she kept polishing. First love, first homecoming dance, first heartbreak. The kind of man people remember better than he probably deserved because nostalgia softens every edge. I had met him once at a fundraiser downtown 2 years earlier. He shook my hand too firmly, smiled too long at Megan, and told me I was a lucky guy in a tone that sounded less like a compliment and more like an inspection. Megan laughed it off in the car. She said I was reading too much into it. Maybe I was. That was the problem with disrespect when it is wrapped in charm. It makes you look unreasonable for noticing. My phone stayed face down on the table, but I could feel it there, carrying her airport photo, her careful words, her confidence that I would sit at home and wait like a loyal appliance. I did not hate her in that moment. Hate would have been easier. I felt the tired grief of realizing someone you loved had started treating your devotion like a backup plan. At 8:23, Caleb Mercer called back. His voice was calm, professional, the kind of calm that makes a room feel less crooked. I told him about the message, the resort reservation, the shared account notifications, the travel rewards email, and the folder on my desk. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he said, "Logan, do not argue by text. Do not threaten. Do not explain. Bring me copies Monday morning, and tonight, protect your accounts, document everything, and stay ordinary." Stay ordinary. That phrase settled over me like a coat. So I washed the glass, fed the dogs, locked the back door, and turned off the kitchen light. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside that quiet house, the old version of me, the man who begged to be chosen, had already packed his things. The night stretched on, and I remained at the desk, the folder open in front of me like a map I had been following for months. Each receipt, each confirmation, each account statement built a picture that was not visible to anyone else, only to me. I traced the dates with my finger, aligning them in my mind with the times Megan would leave the house, the weekends she had claimed were spent with friends, and the moments she had said she needed space. All those small details had a rhythm, and suddenly that rhythm made sense. She believed she had control, that I was unaware, that she could leave and return without consequences. But knowledge is a quiet kind of power, and preparation is its silent companion. I pulled out the list of her travel confirmations, scanned the hotel address, the check-in times, the coded notes that indicated room preferences and dinner reservations. All standard, all normal, all completely traceable. I did not need to make a move yet. The awareness of what was coming, the alignment of timing, and the certainty that patience would serve me more than confrontation had ever done made my chest feel steady, not heavy. Outside the window, the last light of the evening fell across the maple leaves, shadows stretching over the lawn like an old film frame, familiar and still. The dogs lay quietly, unaware of the tension, the ordinary life continuing in small details while the larger story quietly rearranged itself. I made a note of the times I would need to verify each step, ensuring that documentation and observation were aligned without intrusion, without making Megan feel watched, without giving away the rhythm of my understanding. She had spent months building confidence, a sense that the trip was her secret domain, a personal adventure away from me. That confidence was a gift, a mistake. I leaned back in the chair, hands resting on the cool wood, remembering why patience had been a lesson learned long ago. Every long evening in my office, every time I had carefully recorded, every instance of checking a transaction, confirming a reservation, validating a plan, had led to this point. The room was quiet except for the subtle hum of the air conditioning, a reminder of continuity, of the ordinary, which would soon contrast with the clarity of consequences. I poured a glass of water, watched the reflection of the folder in the lamp, and considered how small actions accumulate into outcomes that feel much larger than their individual weight. By 11:30, I had organized each sheet, cross-referenced the accounts, and written down the sequence of events that would make the patterns undeniable. Not confrontation, not drama, just certainty, timing, and the steady calm of a man who had spent years learning that preparation without exposure is often the sharpest edge. The phone buzzed once more, a minor notification from her travel app, and I ignored it, letting the quiet house, the open folder, and the slow approach of midnight reinforce the knowledge that the first move would be mine, but only when the alignment was perfect and when every unseen detail was secured. The first rays of morning slipped through the blinds, casting thin stripes of light across the desk where the blue folders still lay open. I sat in my chair, shoulders relaxed but mind alert, reviewing each document one last time before taking any action. Megan's trip was set to begin within hours, and every detail I had compiled formed a quiet, invisible grid that mapped her intentions. Each hotel reservation, flight confirmation, and dinner booking aligned perfectly with timestamps, showing a rhythm that was deliberate, predictable, and fully documented. I sipped black coffee, the warmth grounding me, while the dogs shifted slightly on the rug, their presence a small, normalizing heartbeat in the house. The house itself felt like it was holding its breath, quiet and waiting, as though aware of the tension that had accumulated over weeks. I leaned back, reviewing the notes on account transfers and carefully logged communications. The pattern was clear, but still, no action was necessary. The timing of every move mattered, and the control would be mine only when all elements were in place. I thought about the early mornings spent at the construction site, reviewing contracts, managing crews, ensuring deadlines were met, and realized that patience and meticulous attention had always been my tools. They were tools I would now apply to this personal situation, silently and without exposure. I double-checked the correspondence records, the loyalty program emails, the timestamps of her last few check-ins with friends, and the subtle clues embedded in the reservations she had made. Each page I touched reminded me that preparation is invisible but decisive. The sun climbed higher, glancing off the polished surface of the table, highlighting small imperfections in the wood that had been there since we bought the house. I noticed them briefly and then returned my attention to the folder. At this hour, Megan was probably at the airport, confident and oblivious, thinking she was exercising freedom while I remained unaware. That perception, I thought, was her first miscalculation. My awareness, my patience, and the documentation I had compiled formed a quiet barrier around the truth of what was coming. I set the pen down, folded the notes neatly beside the folder, and allowed myself a moment to breathe fully, appreciating the calm that comes only when you know all variables and the sequence of events. The house remained silent, the ordinary hum of appliances and distant traffic a contrast to the extraordinary clarity of the plan taking shape. Today would unfold exactly as it should, not because of confrontation, not because of aggression, but because the pattern had been recognized, every detail accounted for, and timing was everything. I closed my eyes briefly and pictured the day ahead, knowing that the first move, though invisible to anyone else, would establish the balance, and nothing rushed or impulsive would undo the precision I had cultivated. By mid-morning, the first move was already in motion, and Megan had no idea it had happened. I did not send her a long message. I did not call Brandon. I did not post cryptic quotes online or ask friends to choose sides. I drove 12 miles to Caleb Mercer's office with the blue folder on the passenger seat and my coffee going cold in the cup holder. His office sat in a brick building near downtown Franklin, quiet and professional, with framed law degrees on the wall and a receptionist who spoke softly, as if every person who walked in carried something breakable. Caleb reviewed the documents one page at a time, his pen moving only when something mattered. He looked at the resort reservation, the shared account records, the property paperwork, and the message Megan had sent me from the airport. When he reached the smiling emoji, he paused just long enough for me to feel the insult all over again. Then he placed the paper down and said, This gives us clarity. Not victory. Not revenge. Clarity. That word felt clean. He prepared a formal notice of separation, careful and precise, with no dramatic language and no accusations beyond what could be supported. He advised me to move half of the joint checking balance into a separate account for household expenses, freeze shared credit lines from new charges, preserve all records, and communicate with Megan only in writing. Legal steps. Adult steps. The kind of steps that do not make noise until they land. At 11:08, while Megan was probably riding toward the mountains with Brandon beside her, Caleb's office sent the notice to her email and to the address she had used for the resort booking. I imagined the notification appearing on her phone while she still believed the weekend belonged to her. I imagined her smile holding for 1 second too long before confusion reached her eyes. Then my own phone buzzed. Megan. I let it ring until it stopped. 30 seconds later, a text arrived. What is this? I looked at the screen, felt my pulse stay even, and typed exactly what Caleb had told me to write. Please direct all legal questions to my attorney. There was no anger in the sentence. That was what made it heavier. Another call came. Then another. Then 3 messages in a row. Logan, do not do this. You are overreacting. It is not what you think. Funny thing about that phrase. People only say it when they know exactly what it looks like. I turned the phone face down and sat in Caleb's parking lot, watching an American flag move gently in the summer wind. For months, Megan had controlled the story by keeping me uncertain. Now certainty had entered the room, and she did not like the way it stood there. I drove home through ordinary traffic, past gas stations, school buses, and front porches with hanging ferns, and the world kept moving as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. The man she expected to wait quietly beside the wreckage had stepped away from it before the first suitcase was unpacked. By late afternoon, the emails had been acknowledged, the notices delivered, and the first subtle effects of action were starting to ripple through Megan's day. I returned home and walked slowly through the familiar hallways, the light from the setting sun catching dust particles that hung like tiny motes in the air, each one suspended in the calm of the house. I passed the kitchen, where the chairs were still positioned as they had been for breakfast, untouched and orderly, the mundane rhythm of life giving weight to what had already shifted beneath the surface. The dogs followed me with quiet steps, sensing nothing unusual, just the return of their owner and the consistency of routine. I went into the office, placed the blue folder back in its drawer, and sat in front of the window, looking out at the street below. Cars passed in their ordinary patterns. Joggers followed the sidewalks, and a neighbor hung laundry in the gentle breeze, unaware of the changes that had quietly begun inside our home. Megan's messages had stopped for now, the buzzing of notifications replaced by silence, and I allowed myself to feel the relief that came from control without confrontation. Each document, every reservation, every small financial detail had been aligned, and I did not need to act hastily to prove what had been meticulously prepared. I thought about the weeks of observation, the times I had paused and considered rather than reacted, and I realized how much power patience can give when it is paired with foresight. In the living room, the framed photographs caught the warm light, showing moments of our past that were still untouched by conflict, moments that reminded me of how careful life must be approached when trust has been eroded slowly. I made a cup of tea, placed it beside the desk, and allowed myself to plan quietly, noting the sequence of steps that would follow in the coming days, each one measured, deliberate, and precise. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the lawn, creating patterns that seemed almost symbolic of the alignment I had achieved. Megan, far away, probably still carried the belief that she controlled the weekend, that her choices were hidden and her confidence unchallenged. The ordinary world moved on around her, but the quiet, patient structure I had established meant that perception no longer dictated reality. I looked at the folder once more, closed it carefully, and leaned back in my chair. The house was calm, the evening air drifting gently through open windows, and the day had shown that preparation, timing, and steady restraint could shift outcomes without a single shout, a single confrontation, or a single dramatic gesture. Everything that needed to change had already begun to change, quietly, invisibly, and with precision. The evening settled with a soft glow through the windows, and Logan Brooks stood quietly in the living room, letting the stillness of the house sink in. Megan's messages had slowed, her confidence replaced by an invisible uncertainty she could not yet name, and the knowledge that her carefully planned weekend had been anticipated weighed on her without a sound. I poured a fresh cup of black coffee, inhaled the rich aroma, and walked to the window, noticing the ordinary movements of the neighborhood. A child riding a bicycle down the street, neighbors watering their gardens, mail being delivered. Everything appeared normal, and yet, inside the structure I had quietly put in place, perception and reality were no longer aligned. The blue folder had returned to the bottom drawer of my desk, but its contents had already done their work. I thought about the weeks of patience, the hours of documentation, the careful tracking of every step, not to catch Megan in wrongdoing, but to ensure that truth, timing, and preparation would do the talking. There was no need for confrontation, no dramatic speeches, only the quiet satisfaction of certainty and control. As the sky deepened to a rich indigo, I considered how easily ordinary life continues around extraordinary changes that are unseen by the unobservant eye. The weekend would unfold, but now with clarity, structure, and a balance Megan had not anticipated. I sipped the coffee and reflected on what it meant to act without rage, to let careful planning, calm observation, and strategic timing guide the outcome. It was a lesson in restraint, patience, and foresight that had begun months before in the quiet moments of noticing, recording, and preparing. Logan Brooks had not shouted, had not raged, had not intruded, yet the story had shifted. As the dogs lay at my feet, breathing steadily, I wondered how often people forget that the quietest actions can carry the heaviest weight. And now I ask you, the viewer, as you have followed this journey of observation, preparation, and subtle power, what would you have done in Logan's place? How would patience and careful planning influence your response? And how would the outcome differ if emotion had replaced strategy? If you found this story compelling, if the timing, the subtle reveals, and the quiet yet decisive steps resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel for more narratives where patience, insight, and strategy create twists that unfold in unexpected yet satisfying ways, allowing you to witness not only drama but the power of controlled action and foresight.